In the biting chill of a Chicago winter, Ellie Harper trudged through slushy streets, her threadbare coat barely shielding her from the wind. At 24, life had not been kind to her. Orphaned at 10, she bounced through foster homes, scraping by on grit and odd jobs. Now, she worked as a diner waitress, her $1.50 in tips from a double shift jingling in her pocket. It was all she had until payday, and her stomach growled, reminding her she hadn't eaten since yesterday's stale bagel. Ellie's path took her past St. Mary's Hospital, its glowing sign a beacon in the dusk. Outside, a small crowd huddled around a donation table, a handmade poster flapping in the wind. Help save Lily. Urgent medical funds needed. Ellie slowed, her eyes catching the photo of a girl, no older than 6, with wide blue eyes and a fragile smile. The words leukemia and experimental treatment stood out. Something stirred in Ellie, a pang from her own childhood, when no one had come to her rescue. A woman at the table, her face etched with worry, handed out flyers. Please, she said to passers-by, my daughter needs this treatment. We're so close. Most people hurried past, heads down. Ellie hesitated. That $1.50 could buy a hot coffee, maybe a sandwich. But Lily's face lingered in her mind. Without overthinking, Ellie stepped forward, pulled the crumpled bills and coins from her pocket, and dropped them into the donation jar. The woman's eyes widened. Are you sure? She asked, noting Ellie's worn shoes and thin coat. It's not much, Ellie said softly, but I hope it helps. She walked away, the wind colder now, but her chest felt lighter, as if she'd shed a weight she didn't know she carried. Across town, in a glass-walled penthouse, Nathan Caldwell stared at his laptop, the glow illuminating his tired face. At 38, he was the CEO of Caldwell Tech, a man who'd built an empire from nothing. But wealth couldn't fix everything. His daughter, Lily, was his world, and her leukemia diagnosis had shattered it. The experimental treatment in Switzerland was her last hope, but the costs were astronomical, even for him. He'd sold properties, liquidated assets, and started a public fundraiser, swallowing his pride. Every dollar counted, and he tracked the donations obsessively. That evening, Nathan visited the hospital, where his sister, Mara, manned the donation table. She handed him the day's tally, her voice weary. We got a few more today. One was just $1.50, but it came from this young woman who looked like she needed it more than we do. Nathan frowned, something about the gesture tugging at him. He'd known sacrifice, back when he was scraping by, before the world called him a success. Did you get her name? He asked. Mara shook her head. She just left. Didn't even wait for a thank you. Ellie's life trudged on. The diner was busier than usual, the holiday rush bringing in demanding customers and meager tips. She didn't regret giving her last dollar, but hunger gnawed harder each day. One night, as she wiped down tables, a man in a tailored coat walked in, his presence out of place among the cracked vinyl booths. He sat in her section, ordered a coffee, and watched her with quiet intensity. Ellie, used to being invisible, barely noticed. You're Ellie, right? He said as she refilled his cup. She froze, her name sounding foreign in his polished voice. Yeah, do I know you? She asked, wary. He introduced himself as Nathan Caldwell, and her stomach dropped. The name was familiar, his face had been on billboards, in news articles about tech moguls. Why was he here? I heard what you did for my daughter, Nathan said, his voice low but steady. The donation. $1.50. Ellie flushed, embarrassed. It was nothing, she mumbled, turning to leave. But Nathan's next words stopped her. It wasn't nothing. It was everything. That dollar put us over the goal. Lily's getting the treatment. Ellie's eyes stung, and she busied herself with the coffee pot to hide it. Nathan continued, explaining how he'd tracked her down through the diner's manager, who'd overheard her talking about the donation. I wanted to thank you, he said, sliding an envelope across the table, and to offer you a job at my company. You've got a heart most people don't. We need that. Inside the envelope was a check, enough to change her life, though Ellie didn't know it yet. She shook her head, pushing it back. I didn't do it for money, she said, voice firm. Nathan smiled, a rare warmth in his eyes. I know. That's why I trust you. Weeks later, Ellie stood in a crisp blazer, nervous but determined, at Caldwell Tech's headquarters. The job wasn't glamorous, administrative work, organizing community outreach, but it paid enough for a small apartment, groceries, and a coat that actually kept her warm. She saw Nathan occasionally, his guarded demeanor softening over time. He'd bring Lily to the office after treatment, the girls' laughter filling the sterile halls. Ellie and Lily bonded over coloring books and bad jokes, and Nathan noticed, his loneliness easing in their presence. One evening, as snow fell outside, Nathan invited Ellie to dinner, not as a boss, but as a man who'd begun to see her as more. Ellie hesitated, her old fears of being hurt resurfacing. But something in Nathan's eyes, vulnerable and earnest, made her say yes. They talked for hours about loss, hope, and the small acts that change everything. Years later, at Lily's 10th birthday, Ellie stood beside Nathan, her hand in his, watching Lily blow out candles, her health restored. The room was filled with people whose lives Ellie had touched through her work at Caldwell Tech's new charity arm, funded by Nathan but driven by her vision. She'd given her last dollar once, not knowing it would lead her here to a family, a purpose, and a love she'd never dared dream of. The world didn't always reward kindness, but sometimes, in the quiet ripple of a single act, it gave back more than Ellie could have imagined.